Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Andrew Lee, and I'm part of the Understood Content team. The topic of today's webinar is Universal Design for Learning, and we're really happy to have with us here teacher and school administrator Katie Novak. Hi, Katie.
Hey, how are you doing today?
Great. Katie, could you tell our parent audience a little bit about yourself and your background with UDL?
Yes. First of all, the most important thing is I'm a mom of 4 little ones. So I am talking to you parent to parent this morning. Also, I have 13 years of full-time teaching experience. So I was in the classroom. I taught middle school and high school before moving to administration. And I've been in administration as well now for a total of 3 years. And in addition to that, I've been teaching grad courses and things like that for 13 years. And so I've had a really cool opportunity to know about UDL and to share it as a teacher, as a graduate instructor, and as an administrator. And so basically, in my experience, what I try to do is take Universal Design for Learning, which is a framework which educators use to design and deliver instruction, and simplify it so everyone can understand what it is and why it's so beneficial for our kids.
That's awesome. I think parents are really going to find this session useful. And for those of you out there watching today, we'll have a Q&A after Katie's presentation at the very end. But in the meantime, if you feel like just saying hi or telling us where you're from or a little bit about what you might be interested in, there's a chat box to the right of your screen. So please definitely type in there if you just even want to keep the conversation going. With that said, I'm going to hand it back over to Katie to start her presentation.
Okay, so I am ready to dive in. So we're going to call this webinar Universal Design for Learning 101, and we're going to go over the basics of the framework, and I'm going to give a couple of analogies or a couple of examples to help you understand why this is so great when it happens in classrooms beginning at pre-K and going all the way to college. And also, it's really important. It's an important framework you can actually use at home, because we all know as parents, there's certain things we want our kids to learn as well at home, like we want them to learn to clean the table and to clean up their rooms and to be cooperative in the car. And these guidelines you can actually use as a parent to try to get better outcomes for your kids as well. So to dive in, the goals of the webinar today is that I want you to know what the UDL framework is. So if you were to bump into somebody on the street and they were to say, hey, have you heard of this UDL thing? You could say, yeah, I actually know what that is. And I can tell you a lot about how it's really good for kids, especially, students who have learning and attention issues. And then also, one of the goals of this webinar would be that you learn enough about the framework and its implementation, or how schools kind of roll it out, so you can partner with your kids' schools and with teachers to kind of support them as they go through this journey. And then also, you can think about how you can use these guidelines at home with your students, with your kids rather, so you can get some really nice outcomes in your home as well. So the best way for me to explain this is to kind of go back for a minute and think about traditional education, or the way that most of us experience school. And so the best way to say this is to think of a dinner party. So I love to have people at my house. If you're having a holiday, or if you're just having people over for a cookout, a lot of the times when you're thinking about planning for a dinner party, you think about planning to your strengths as a chef and as a host. And so I make like a mean pot of meatballs. And so if I was going to plan for a dinner party, what I would likely do is say, okay, to my husband, hey, honey, we're going to have some friends over tonight. Can you go out and get some garlic bread and some pasta, and I'm going to make some meatballs, and everything's going to be great. And then we have some new friends come over, and we weren't quite sure of what their dietary variability was. We didn't know exactly what they ate. And all of a sudden they show up, and I have Lucy and Nathaniel and Greg and Wanda, and I realize, oh no, not everybody can eat this. Okay, so I've now put together this big plate of spaghetti and meatballs, and, let's say I put some Parmesan cheese on top without thinking, and now Lucy can't eat that, and, Greg can't eat that because of the pasta, and Victoria certainly can't eat it, and, with the way that I make meatballs, Wanda's not going to want any either. And so what do I start doing now is I start making some accommodations. And these are coming from a place that I really care about my guests. There's nothing wrong with me making accommodations, but what you start doing is you start scrambling. So I run over to my pantry and I'm like, oh my goodness, what can I have that Greg can eat? Okay, I can just put meatballs on the side, and then I can give him some tortilla chips. I have tortilla chips. and you start kind of running around. And now what I'm doing is I have one really good meal, which I planned for, and now I'm accommodating for 5 other guests. And that is so much work. And so if I were to go back to the beginning, and it doesn't even matter who my guests are, but when I'm planning for a party, I can ask myself, well, what can my main dish be? So what can I serve that regardless of who comes to my party, he or she would have a meal that they could eat? And there's 2 different ways to do this. One of which is I could reduce the menu to kind of the lowest common denominator. And I could say, well, everyone can eat water and lettuce, so I can just serve that. But we all know how that party would turn out, because people afterwards would be like going to the drive-thru, because it would be like a complete failure. The other option is I can put out, I guess what you could say is like a buffet. So I could still have an Italian night, but what I could do ahead of time is go, listen, I might have some people who really can't eat meat, or who, don't, that they want to be healthier, or, they don't like the texture of pasta, or whatever that is. And I start saying, you know what, let me put out a buffet of sorts. And so I'll put a couple of different kinds of sauce. I can put out some olive oil, and I can put out some just plain marinara, and I can put the meatballs on the side, and I can have a salad that has, goat cheese and Parmesan on the side as well, with a couple different sides of dressing. I could make gluten-free pasta because it tastes almost exactly the same, and then any of my guests who are eating gluten-free could eat it as well. And so that really is the kind of framework and the proactive planning that goes into universal design for learning. Is you're moving away from saying, well, this lesson is one that I know works really well for me. I've taught it for years. And then you wait until some students who come in who maybe that is not going to be difficult enough for them. Maybe it's going to be too easy. Maybe because of learning and attention issues, students can't access it. And then I'm scrambling trying to meet all their needs. Whereas if I just stopped before I planned and said, how can I plan this lesson so everyone can enjoy it, then you're going to have much better outcomes on the end. So that is a very quick introduction to UDL and how it's kind of like having a dinner party. And as you learn more about it, you're going to realize that, wow, this idea of proactive planning, it really fits in with a number of really other important education initiatives that are happening right now in your child's school. So first of all, there's new federal legislation that kind of outlines how schools and districts need to run, in order to basically receive, funding support from the federal government. And this is called the Every Student Succeeds Act. And it has basically revised No Child Left Behind. And it actually talks about universal design for learning in the document in a number of different places. So this is something that's now going to be on the radar of every state Department of Education of saying, okay, so we need better outcomes for students. What is UDL? The second thing is that, yes, we want our students to learn about photosynthesis, and they need to know how to write, and they need to know how to read, and those are really important standards. But also there's this focus lately that people call 21st century skills. You might also hear the term next generation skills, but it's basically regardless of what content students have, if they want to go out and choose their path in life, they need to be really strong at communicating. They need to be self-directed. They need to be able to set their own goals and decide on different strategies. And we know as adults, those strategies often won't work out. So we can have a great plan and then something gets in the way. And what do we have to do is we have to problem solve. And so if we just have an education that's straight out focused on, learning a lot of content and being able to, let's say, be really good at answering flashcards, we're not becoming 21st century thinkers. And so UDL also provides teachers with tools to make sure that when you're teaching standards, you're also providing a lot of different options for kids to communicate in ways that they can access, that they can set goals for themselves and they can problem solve. And again, it always comes back to providing these options for students to do that, because there's not only one way to solve problems. Also, there are these standards-based education. And so every state has knowledge and skills that students are required to learn at the end of each grade. And a lot of the times we refer to these as college and career-ready skills, which basically means that, by 12th grade, when students move on, every American should have some basis of knowledge that they can share together. And then lastly, what some people may not realize is a lot of states are now re-examining how they evaluate their teachers. And so just as teachers are evaluating our kids, schools are also looking to evaluate teachers. And this generally now falls into 4 different domains. So back when I was teaching, predominantly they were looking at, did I know how to plan a lesson and could I teach students effectively? And now there's 2 additional domains that most states are looking at, and that is family and community engagement is one of them, and the other one is professional responsibility. So, do teachers, are they always in a respectful, are they respectful in their communication? Do they go out and try to learn more about the best practices in education and bring them back to their colleagues? But the thing that I want to highlight here is this idea of family and community engagement is teachers really need universal design for learning for this as well, because the traditional methods to involve families in school definitely favors certain groups of families. And so if I was going to have, for example, I have 2 little guys in preschool, in pre-K, and they're having an end of the year celebration next week at like 9 a.m. And I'm working full time. And so when you have opportunities to involve parents and community, and the option is a 9 a.m. celebration, what you're doing is you're excluding a lot of people. And so you think about the dinner party again, and that's serving basically like putting out meatballs for someone who doesn't eat meat, is because it's not that I don't want to be there, but I can't access it. And so as you're starting to talk to your kids' teachers and your friends about UDL, it's also helpful you can get families more involved, which shows that kids do better in school when families are involved. And that it also can impact your evaluation, because you can start saying to your principal or your evaluator, hey, look at all these cool things I'm doing with UDL. And this shows that I'm a stronger teacher because I now am taking professional responsibility for not only teaching all kids, but for involving all families as well. So the UDL umbrella is going to kind of cover this idea of every standard that teachers are going to have to deliver, all of the skills and 21st century skills underneath this kind of federal mandate of every student succeeds. And they also, as teachers, are going to really want to involve you as parents as well. So when we start talking about UDL, it's based on 3 different principles. And one of those principles is engagement. And a lot of the times when we think of engagement, we think of just like having a lot of fun. So like you could walk into a classroom and you're like, wow, the kids are laughing and they seem so involved. They must be engaged. And the definition of engagement is actually equal parts attention and commitment. And this is going to be really critical to kind of step back and reflect on, because when you're thinking about how to engage in UDL, we're not just looking to get kids interested, because that's really easy and it's also very short term. What we want to do, especially with students who have learning and attention issues, is to get them commit to the long term. And commitment means equal parts being able to sustain effort and persistence over the long term, and also how to cope when that strategy gets out of whack. So we all know our kids could go to school and be super into something and be like, oh my gosh, we did this awesome project today in school. We were learning about this. And then you're like, okay, it's time to do homework. And they're like, no, I don't want to do the homework. It's too hard. And that's a perfect example of that. Students were being really compliant when they were in school, and they really like their teacher and they're enjoying their education, but they are not engaged, because somebody who is engaged is gritty and they pull out all the stops and they say, okay, this was my plan to do homework and it's tricky, but there's got to be another way to do this. And again, that has to be taught. That does not in any way, shape, or form happen overnight. But I just want you to keep in mind that definition of engagement as we start going a little bit deeper into the UDL framework, so you can kind of keep that in your mind, that is the goal of UDL, is equal parts attention and very high commitment. So UDL is born from research on what happens in the brain when people learn. And if you look at these 3 pictures, these are 3 different networks of the brain. And it basically goes through and it talks about how learners learn. And so, we want, first of all, if we go over to the right and we talk about the why, we want students to know why they're doing something. So why am I going to learn this? Okay, so that's number 1. You can recruit interest that way. But why is it important to continue to persist and pay attention? The second part is, okay, so I get why I'm going to do this. I get that it's going to be tricky. I get that I have all these different options to cope, but what now am I supposed to learn? So this is when we think of traditional teaching of like, let's give a lecture, let's have students read a book. They're trying to get students to understand what is being presented. And then lastly, the how is, what do students do with it? How can they give it back in a meaningful way? And this involves this idea of executive function. And when you think about executive function, what it really breaks down to is a child's ability to set a goal and to create a strategy and to monitor their progress on that strategy. But we know as parents that it's very easy for that strategy to kind of go off course. And if it does, then they need to know how to cope, which goes back to the why. And so when you're thinking about all of these three things, all of them have to be happening for a student to learn. And when we go back to traditional education, there was a really big focus on the what of learning. Of like, okay, class, open up your books today. You're going to learn about the causes of the Civil War. Or you're going to learn about how authors use similes to paint pictures in the reader's head. Or you're going to learn about Newton's Law. And then, we sat there and we listened, or we watched a movie, or we read a book. And then it was like, okay, great, now you're going to take a test. Okay, so that was the how of learning. The problem is we never cared why we were learning. We never thought it was relevant. We never were given options to really grapple with, well, what do we want to do with this information once we know it? And how is it useful? And that's where UDL comes in. And so to dive a little bit deeper into it, let's talk about how it's different from this traditional instruction that was happening, it prevailed in the 1970s pretty much. And then starting in the 1990s, we moved towards this model of differentiated instruction. And differentiated instruction was an amazing, amazing jump in the right direction because traditional education was very, very static. And our teachers were hired to look at the curriculum and, you'd get hired and you'd say, okay, here's your book. The first time that I was hired for a teaching job, they literally said, here's your book for freshman English. And what I did is I evaluated the curriculum and I followed the script. And then I taught the lessons. So I had that bad boy done for the whole year. I could tell you on March 9th what lesson I was going to be teaching. And if students didn't get it, well, that's unfortunate. But it was basically you had a curriculum that you had to cover. And then differentiated instruction came on the scene, which was awesome because what it said was, you know what? We want to move towards inclusion. We want to put every kid in the classroom together. So a third grade student is going to go into a third grade classroom. And some of them might be very different, and some of them might have learning and attention issues, or some of them might, need more of a challenge or less of a challenge, but we're going to put them together. And this is where we end up in almost dinner party territory, because in the traditional instruction, it was basically, if some of you think back to, I can tell you at my grandmother's table, back in the 1980s, is whatever was served was going to be eaten. And so if my grandmother put out pot roasted potatoes, you were going to eat it, or you were going to hear like all these horrible stories about people who starve when they don't eat. And then we move to our differentiation, which is, okay, fine. You're not going to eat that, fine. Go have a bowl of cereal. Okay, and so it was very reactive of saying like, okay, you as a student, I know you aren't capable of doing this, so let me give you something else. So it was very much cause and effect. Like, I'm going to try to teach it as it was scripted, but now I realize really quickly it's not going to work. And so what I'm going to do is provide accommodations. And that was really awesome because what it allowed was for all the students to be in there together. But again, the teacher was scrambling, trying to say, okay, I need something for him, I need something for her. You could never spend a lot of time as a teacher, like really explaining what was being done or, trying to push kids further because you were running around making decisions for kids. And then UDL, again, is much more proactive. And that's saying, okay, before I even design this lesson, I might still have a curriculum in front of me and I'm going to read it. But let me think about my classroom environment. Let me think about the culture of these kids. And I want to be really, really intentional about creating all these different options. So when the kids walk in, I can present the options to them. I can then challenge them to create goals for themselves. Like, think about, well, what do you need? And then I can spend a lot of time actually going around and empowering each of them, to say, okay, have you made a good choice? How do you know? If you didn't, let's talk about something you could do differently. And so you have a lot of time within the UDL model to actually spend time teaching. This is the same table. We're just going to go a little bit deeper into it. Whereas traditional instruction in like the 1980s to early 1990s was really thinking about this average student. And when we consider students in the margins, it's really about those students who are in like the top 10% or the bottom 10% in any sort of spectrum. So this morning I took my 1-year-old to the doctor's. So he had a doctor's appointment, and they took his height, and he's 15 months old, and he's almost 36 inches tall. And they're like, he's a super giant. He's in the 99.9 percentile. Okay, so what we would say in UDL is he's in the margins, because we don't want to give him a label, but we say, you know what? He's way out there in that top 10% or way in the bottom 10%. And so traditional instruction, if it didn't work for those kids, they'd put them somewhere else. And differentiation said, no, we want them all back in here. Let's bring them back in. But we kind of need to work around the fact that some of them are going to be in the top 10% and some of them are going to be in the bottom 10%. So I'm going to create accommodations or different lessons or different options for those kids. And so again, you're making now, 4 or 5 meals instead of 1. UDL says, you know what, I'm going to plan for the fact that maybe next year, maybe the year after, maybe in 10 years, I don't know when, but I may have a kid who comes in who's really down in the margins on either side. And I value that. I value that, kids are coming from different places and they're going to need different things. And so I'm going to take away those barriers, and I'm just going to give a bunch of options so everybody can come into the buffet and say, hey, wait, there's actually something I can eat here. Now, one thing as a parent, you might be going, I'm a little nervous about this buffet thing, because if I set my 6-year-old out to a buffet, you can be sure he would come back with 16 brownies and a Sprite. And so a lot of UDL is not just providing the options for the choices, but the options for the goal setting, the options for the coping, to help students know, well, what is really the best thing for you. And so you could go to a buffet and you could say, hey, listen, I need everyone to choose some kind of protein. What's a protein? Let's teach what's a protein. And I could do that by showing a video or saying you could read about it, or you could sit with me and I'm going to teach everyone what a protein is. And now you go up and you find the protein that works best for you. And so that is much more about what UDL is, as opposed to differentiation, where it might be the same options, but I'm making those decisions a lot of the times for the students, and saying, you go up to the buffet and you choose this. And so it all comes down to these UDL guidelines, if you look at that. And so obviously the text is very small. You don't in any way or shape or form need to look at what those guidelines actually are. But when you're providing multiple means of engagement, you're trying to get kids to understand why they are learning something. How do we want them to be purposeful and motivated? And to provide multiple means of engagement, there's 3 guidelines. And it tells us you have to provide options for self-regulation. And that's all about, you have to create an environment that's very motivating, that's very much like, you got this, kids, you can do it. It's this idea of, maybe you can't do it right now, you can't do it yet, but you're going to be able to do it. You just got to stick in and it's going to be awesome. And then also you need a bunch of different options for how to cope, and how do you be self-reflective? How do you know when a struggle becomes unproductive and you need a new strategy? And you have to teach those strategies too. So when you get frustrated, what are some things that you can do that allow you to kind of stay on the course? Also, it's about providing options for sustaining effort and persistence. So, creating a bunch of buffet options that have varying levels of challenge, to say, you need to choose something that's a little bit hard for you. If you choose something too easy, you're going to get bored. And if you choose something too challenging, then you're just going to be frustrated. And that's no good for anybody. And so really thinking about, okay, what do you want to choose today and why? And let's talk about those choices. And then also we need to recruit their interest. So we need to create options that are really valuable and authentic. If we're going to think about, my real goal is that students will be able to come up with the main idea of a text. I need to have choices where they're reading about skateboarding, and they're reading about how you can make power from cow manure, and you can read about, what's happening right now in the NBA finals, or you can read about the American Girl doll store opening up. Okay, because what you're doing there is I'm heightening the goal. I am then making it authentic and relevant. And then I'm going to say, okay, when you're reading, here's some coping skills. Partner up with a buddy. You can come and sit with me and I'll help you. I have an option of, audio on some of these things where you can listen to them. Read it on the iPad and you can make the words bigger and you can watch videos to go alongside with it. That's the engagement piece. And then when I'm actually teaching it, when I'm representing that information, I can say, okay, so when we're reading, here's some cool ways that we can try to figure out the main idea. And one of those things is text structure. How do you understand the different kinds of text structure? And so I might say, you can read about text structure, or you can come and sit with me and I'll do a lesson, or there's really cool videos and there's this app where you can learn about text structure. So you decide what's best for you, and going through it and saying, I'm going to teach it in a bunch of different ways. And then lastly, now that you know about text structure, now that you actually care to read something and get involved, what are you going to do with it? And so often we go back to, let's just have them write it, or let's have them take a multiple choice test, or let's have them take a traditional assessment. And options like this are, okay, I want you to tell me the main idea of what you read by creating a skit, or by doing a poster, or pretending that you're making a commercial, or I want you to rewrite it to explain it to somebody who is in kindergarten, or rewrite it so your teacher would understand it. Or you could pretend that you're the writer, and you could critique what was the best part about the article and what was the worst part. And giving options throughout allows every kid to get really excited and engaged, but also in the back of your head, you're likely thinking it's also giving them those 21st century skills, because they're having practice being self-directed. They're having practice communicating that back to the teachers, saying, this is what I choose and why. And then the teacher actually has an opportunity to provide mastery-oriented feedback to say, okay, so I actually like that strategy, but 5 minutes into it, if you're feeling frustrated, I need you to go over there, and I need you to go to the sensory bin real quick, and I want you to squeeze something really tight and then go back. Okay, that's what I'm thinking is going to be good for you. So it's really this like beautiful environment that you're creating of like, we need to push ourselves, we need to get better. And one of the best ways to do this is to model it. And so to say, you know what, I'm going to give you feedback all the time, but I want you to give me feedback too. So if you don't have an option that you really like, I need you to tell me that. Tell me what you would like to read about so I can have a better option for you next time. And so it's this culture of mastery-oriented feedback where we're having kids really think about, how do you express your wants and needs, and how can I help you to meet them? And it's not my decision. It's my job to facilitate that learning, but I can't force anyone to learn anything if they're not engaged in the process. So moving on with the UDL guidelines, this relates to a really cool study that was done in the early 1980s. Jean Anion was going into schools that served students that had wildly different socioeconomic backgrounds. And, these terms today could be seen as rather, stifling or labeling. But when she did it, she called them working class schools and middle class schools and affluent schools and elite schools. And she went into these schools and she expected to find very different curriculum. And so she'd go into these working class schools where, the families were, either they weren't working at all or they were working in predominantly working class jobs. And she saw what they were teaching, in second grade and in middle school and in high school. And she went to all these different schools along the spectrum. And then she went also into the schools in the elite areas where, the students are, their parents maybe are doctors or lawyers and CEOs. And she realized the teachers were actually teaching the same thing. The 5th grade science book is the 5th grade science book. And, the 10th grade world history book is the 10th grade world history book. And so what was so different about these classrooms? And she coined this idea of hidden curriculum, which is basically the way that teachers were interacting with kids and how that allowed the students to have better opportunities in life. So when she went into the working class classrooms, it was very much, I'm the teacher, here's the lesson, this is what you need to do, don't ask questions. And the teachers loved those kids. I mean, it wasn't that they hated teaching or they didn't want the kids to have outcomes, but they were thinking like kids need to be respectful, they need to follow directions, they need to sit up straight, they need to listen. And those kids got really, really good at learning how to follow directions and, kind of stay quiet and do the work they're being asked to do. And when students did that, teachers were very successful. Where in the elite schools, kids were like sitting on the back of the radiators, they're laying on their stomachs reading books, and the teacher would say, okay, this is what I'm thinking about doing today. And they'd be like, oh, can we go outside? And she'd be like, I don't know, let's talk about, why do you want to do that? And they were having this conversation, and she said, those kids are being churned to be CEOs. Think outside the box, question authority in a very respectful way, know when the line is drawn, make your own decisions, sculpt your own path. And so, this relates a lot to UDL, and what does it mean for involvement is we need kids to be advocates of their own education so they can learn how to become advocates of their own life. So this again, impacts this idea of 21st century skills. So on the right-hand column, when teachers do this, these are the guidelines. When teachers say, I'm going to give you a bunch of different ways to communicate what you know, and I'm going to give you a bunch of different options for grabbing your interest, what they're doing is they're allowing kids to become really good communicators. Because I need to say, okay, so I want to teach somebody, about, let's say, the causes of the Civil War. And so, if I'm going to do that by giving a presentation to my peers, that's going to look a lot different than if I want to write a letter to somebody through a time machine and, talk to them about my impression of what happened. And it's also going to look a lot different than if I'm writing a diary entry of a child who was alive during the Civil War, or if I'm going to create a documentary on video. And so what you're doing is you're giving options. And so students have to actually stop and think, okay, what's my purpose? Who's my audience? And how does this need to look? It's very different from you're going to write 5 paragraphs. Each paragraph is going to be 3 sentences. Each sentence is going to be either compound or complex. And then, okay, they're good at following directions, but they never really have to think about, is that the most appropriate way to communicate that information? Also, when you're giving them all these options for, hey, choose your assignment, set your goal, they're becoming self-directed. And they're starting to say, hey, I really want to do this. And so, if my strategy goes off the rails, I'm totally comfortable asking for help because now I have these ideas of how I can get back on. And also, it's fine to choose something different. Also, that allows them to solve problems when they know their strategy is off, working with their group and being like, oh gosh, I really wanted to choose this video and I can't even get my iPhone to work. This is so ridiculous. What do I do now? Well, you start getting creative. You problem solve. Do you want to pick a different assignment? Do you need to borrow someone else's phone? Should you ask somebody for help? Okay, all of these things are a part of it. And by working together, by saying there's always another way, there's always another perspective, we start to teach them to really respect other points of view and that people come from a different place. And then lastly, integrative thinking, the definition of that is the ability to hold 2 completely conflicting ideas in your mind at the same time and find merit in both. Can you imagine a world today where we could say, hey, listen, I don't agree with you, but I totally get where you're coming from. Even if we just think of the political landscape, the idea of saying, there are basically 2 sides to political ideology, and you may not agree with one or the other side, but to step back and say, but why do they think that way? And when we say, here's an option today to either watch a video or read, and it's, it doesn't matter what you pick because people are different and you have to respect that somebody might be choosing something differently from you. It's a really cool lesson as well that can start very, very early in life. And so here's some quick examples of how this works in real life. So my husband and I, we have 4 little ones, and 2 years ago we had a trip planned to Hawaii, and we had all of the kids that were going to, both sets of in-laws. We had a whole schedule going, and we were so psyched. And so we had a goal. Goal is get to Hawaii. We had a strategy, get on the flight, pay for the tickets. We had it going on. And then, a couple of hours before we were going to leave for the airport, we got a text, your flight is canceled. So this is a perfect example of real life. Now, if you don't have really strong self-regulation skills, if you don't have the commitment, you say, this is devastating, okay? And then you go and cry or, call and yell at the airline or whatever it is. But instead, we said, okay, there's got to be another way to get to Hawaii. And so this is what we want to teach students is saying there is an answer, guys. Like it's not going to be easy to get there because there's 1,000 other people that are trying to get there as well. But if we work harder, if we're really committed, we might be able to make this happen. And so we divided and conquered. And, we started, I'm from Boston, and we started by calling, the Hartford, Connecticut airport. And then we called the New York airports. And then we called the New Jersey airports. And eventually we found a flight that was leaving from Philadelphia, which is like over 7 hours away. And so we're like, okay, new strategy. We get to Philadelphia to leave tomorrow morning, but we can't leave our car there because we still have a flight back to Boston. So now let's start problem solving again. And when you start to do that with a class to say, okay, how do we do this? It starts to feel almost exciting because it's like a game. Like, how do I get to Hawaii? And it's the same thing of like, how do we finish this math project? Like, let's get psyched about it together. And so it's really creating this environment of collaboration, of motivation, where every student, even those in the margins, start to say, wait, I think I have an idea here. And the whole class starts to explore that. Another example, I have a little one. I have 2 5-year-olds. I have twins. And one of them, we were going on a bike path. And so this was my executive function of we wanted to walk to breakfast. It was 2.5 miles away. About a half a mile in, she was basically like, my legs are telling me not to walk. Okay, so my strategy is going very poorly. And so I'm like, why don't you pick a bouquet of flowers instead? Okay, so this now gets her mind off things. Okay, so she's like, okay, I'm interested, I'm engaged, I will make a bouquet of wildflowers. So then we start walking and she sees these wildflowers and she says, I want to pick that flower. And I'm like, well, you really can't pick that flower. It's in a bunch of poison ivy. So she throws down the wildflowers on the ground. I can't do this. This is the worst day. Like, I can't believe, let's go back. I don't even want to eat. Okay, and so again, it's this whole idea of creating an environment saying, okay, so let's think about it. You really want that flower, but we don't want to step in the poison ivy. What can we do? And I had all the kids with me. And my 6-year-old's like, well, maybe the flower is growing somewhere else. I'm like, okay, like, should we time it? Like, let's see how fast we can find that same flower. And another one said, you could hold her, like, you could, like, just kind of hang her over the side of the bike trail and she could pick it. I'm like, okay, maybe we could try that. Like, what should we do? And so those are really concrete examples of when you're thinking of UDL in your house, of saying, let's stop. Let's think about what is really our goal. Okay, and then what are some other ways that we can do that? And if you're doing that at home and teachers are doing that in the classroom, you're starting to build that engagement, which is the idea of there are always other options if you stop and you want to get creative, but it doesn't feel good to get creative when you're so mad that your strategy isn't working. So it's saying, you know what, it does feel awful and it does feel hard, but there is absolutely 100% ways around this. And so going back to where teachers are coming from, they say, okay, so I have these concepts that I know I need to teach. So it might be something like the state standards are telling me that by the end of this grade, students will understand the order of operations. Or maybe, students need to know what an index or a glossary is. Okay, and those are very different from if you're looking at standards that say that students have to actually decode text, or they have to solve an equation, or they have to write a story. And so those lend themselves to very different UDL options. And so when we're thinking just about those content standards, I'm saying, okay, I want students to really know, the different parts of a textbook, the different features. I want them to pay attention to captions and indexes and things. And so what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that students have options how they're going to learn it. Okay, and that usually is like, do they have an opportunity to play on an iPad? Do they have an opportunity to watch a video? Do they want to sit with me? Do they want to do it by reading about it? And I want to make sure that those choices are engaging and that they're different levels of challenge. And so I might say, okay, so if you so choose, you can go over on this app that's going to have you go through and create, go through the different text structures, and I might say it's really challenging. You can try it if you get through 3 or 4 and you realize it's too much for you. Take a deep breath, come over and we'll talk. But then also I want to know at the end that they actually know what those different aspects of the book are and why are they there. So I need to give options for that as well. And so the teachers during the planning phase, they're going, okay, I want to engage students. So this is a perfect example of I can show them a bunch of different types of text because it doesn't have to be about one thing. It can be choose a nonfiction book that you like from the library, anything you want. It could be a magazine. I could bring in a whole stack of magazines. In middle school, you could bring in, Teen Idol and Sports Illustrated for Kids and Scholastic Scope. In high school, it could be, all the college handbooks. Choose a college handbook that got mailed to you, or you can go down to the academic center and say, okay, so, pick something relevant to you, and we're going to notice all the different text structures that are here. And first, you need to know the actual text structures. So there's problem solution, there's cause and effect, there's description, there's question and answer. So when I'm actually presenting that, we don't all need to be reading a book together about it. We don't all need to be listening to a lecture about it. You ask the class, hey, listen, we're going to be learning about text structures. I've created this really cool Prezi. I'm going to present it. We'll start with a mini lesson for like 10 minutes. And then to dive in, you're going to have some choices. You can go to the iPad. You can sit with me and I'll continue to explain it and we'll kind of play some games so you learn how to do it. If you like to read, I have a pretty cool article that breaks it down. And there's also a brain pop video. So, I want you to think about what you want to do and then tell me, like, what are you going to do if you get frustrated, if it's not working for you? And then at the end, I want you to be able to explain to me why text features exist. So then you're going to have an opportunity to say, I'm going to make a poster. And I'm going to note all the different text structures, and I'm going to explain, how you can tell what those text structures are. Or I want to make an infomercial, and I'm going to pretend I'm selling text structures, and I'm going to talk about what are the features of each different type of text structure. Or you can take a traditional test. Maybe you want to take a traditional test. You might want to work in a group. You might want to work alone. If it's not working, what are you going to do if your group is starting to go off task? Or how do you know if you're going off task? And so it's having those really important conversations. But what I'm realizing is there's so many options because there's nothing there that tells me that students have to read or they have to write. They just have to know something. On the other hand, sometimes there's standards about things that they actually have to do. So we know our students have to be able to write. They have to know what a complete sentence is. They have to be able to decode text. And so when we're doing that, teachers are still going to be really flexible about presenting the lesson. So if I want to say, this is how you write a paragraph, or this is how you write a lab, or this is how you give an oral presentation, you can still learn about how to give an oral presentation by watching a video, by listening to a TED Talk, by listening to a lecture, by reading about what are the aspects of a really strong oral presentation. And then my option is not going to be you can choose to write or you can choose not to write. Okay, I might still give some options about what you can write about, but everyone's sitting down and writing. And so what I need to do now is my option needs to be much more about breaking down the process. So here's an option for you if you're not really comfortable yet writing incomplete sentences. Here's an option for you. And if you already feel like you can just dive in, here's an option that you might want. And here I wrote a sample paper. And so if you want to actually just kind of use this as a template to write your own paper, then do that. And then I'll show you how to move away from it. You can also, I wrote a first paragraph already. If you don't have an idea, because that was a classic thing, I don't have an idea to write about. I already wrote the first paragraph for you. So if your issue is just you can't come up with an idea, remember my goal is can they write? It's not can they write an intro at that point. It's can they write a complete thought. And then I start giving options for the task of saying, what do you want to write about? So if I'm going to have everybody write an informative piece, you're going to inform me about something. It could be you can inform me about how your lacrosse playoffs went yesterday. It could be you can inform me that, this season of, what's a cool show right now? The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, is coming to a close. And then I need a bunch of options for supporting this process too. So I could say, hey, listen, here's some graphic organizers. I'm going to show you how to use them. Let me know. And if I come over and you're feeling frustrated, then I'm going to, give you some feedback about, hey, a graphic organizer would help you. Here's rubrics. Here are how I'm going to grade it. You can have an opportunity to sit with me and I'll give you feedback on your draft. I'll let you know how it's going after you get to the first, 3 sentences. Don't come to me until you've started, but once you start, I don't care what it says on that paper. I'll show you how to make it better. And so there are a little bit of different strategies as far as giving those options. And just to kind of give you a couple of examples in my own classroom, what that looked like is one example is as we were reading Beowulf. And, one of the things that I wanted students to understand was how writers use sensory details so readers get pictures in their heads. And, Beowulf was one of the anchor texts that we were going to read. And, if you want to go to the teaching channel, I actually taught some lessons in the teaching channel so you can see what this looks like. But basically I said, okay, how am I going to engage them? How am I going to get everyone to say, I actually care about pictures? And I did this little skit where I said, okay, I'm going to give you a menu. And I'm going to read it to you, and you're going to choose what you want. And one of the things was like, the meat is falling off the bone. It's the best side dish you've ever had. I'm like, can you picture it? And all the kids are like, yes. And I'm like, okay, draw the picture of what you're ordering. And some kids are like, yeah, I am having chicken. Other kids are having steak. And I'm like, see, I didn't use sensory details. That's not a picture. It means everyone has the same picture. And they were all like, oh my gosh, and realizing that even menus in a really simplistic way give everyone the same picture. And if they didn't, if you ordered the meat dish, you don't know if you're getting duck or shrimp. And so you can watch that video, but it shows like to give options to make things really relevant. Also, one of my goals in 7th grade is I wanted them to really understand the theme of like how people segregate themselves. And I was going to use the text The Outsiders. And then I realized, that text, the reading level is pretty high for an inclusive classroom where I have a lot of students that have very different cognitive backgrounds and very different attention issues. And Outsiders is a long book. And if I really want to know if they understand about how groups kind of segregate themselves, I'm going to give them a choice. They can read a chapter of The Outsiders, or they could read Dr. Seuss's The Star-Bellied Sneetches. If you've ever read the books, they're basically the same exact thing. One at a very, very low reading level, the other one at a more significantly high reading level. But my goal was, do you understand the theme? And it was really interesting because I had some students who were in a very high margin, top 10%, and they're like, that's so cool. I want to read both and then talk about how the authors both basically tell the same story. Also, the new whether your state is a Common Core state or if they chose their own college and career-ready standards, there's a very different definition of text now. Text used to be something that you read just in front of you on a page. Now text means anything basically that you can pull evidence from. So it could be a painting, it could be a map, it could be a chart, it could be a movie, it could be listening to something. And so when you're saying a text-based response, teachers have a really cool opportunity. You could go outside and take a bunch of pictures at recess and come in and say, we're doing a text-based response. I want you to describe the playground. Because what they're going to do is they're going to pull evidence from that picture. And that gives them something so much more authentic, but it's also kind of teaching them how to use that evidence. And then again, say to students, we're going to be reading Beowulf, and then I need you to show me how you can describe something so I have the picture in my head. What kind of things do you want to write about? Tell me. Like, what would be cool? And one of my classes said, you know what, we should totally do monsters. We should describe monsters, and then we'll have to pair up, and we have to read it, and the other person has to draw our monster, and we have to see if they're exactly the same. I'm like, super cool, let's do it. So you're giving students a lot of that. And then again, this idea of mastery-oriented feedback is always going back and saying to students, like, I need to be able to tell you how to make this stronger, and you need to tell me how to make my instruction stronger. So this is not a one-way street. Something that a lot of colleges are doing now is called an exam wrapper, of when you take a test, you actually write how long you studied and what you think you're going to get. And then when the test comes back, you have to go through and read all the teacher's comments on the rubric and then write, why did you lose points? What would you do differently next time? Was it lazy? Was it a misunderstanding of the content? Do you need to go to extra help? And so it's basically, what's your goal next time and what's your strategy? And so these things, again, are really applicable from pre-K all the way until college. So what can you do at home? Again, UDL comes down to really paying attention to your standards or goals and saying, okay, here's the goal. You need to clear the table. Let's talk about some different ways you can clear the table. Traditional, would actually take all of this stuff off the table and put it in the dishwasher. But there might be some other ways, like you have a really cool bulldozer truck. How much of this stuff could you push to the edge before you put it in the dishwasher without breaking it to see if we can clear the table? That's like the classic UDL lens, is like being proactive about being like, let's time it. Let's see how fast you can do it. Can you do it hopping on one foot? I mean, you probably don't want to do that with nice china, but talking about, okay, what are you going to do if it doesn't work? What's something else in the house that can clear it? Could you stack it in a box and then just make one trip to the dishwasher? Also, that idea of Carol Dweck, who's like the growth mindset guru, and she's the person who says, the most successful people in the world are the people who say, I can't do it now, but I'll be able to do it. And that's the idea of not yet. When kids get really frustrated, saying, hey, it's fine, you just can't do it yet. I can't ski yet. Okay, I don't say I don't ski. I can't ski yet. If I wanted to ski, I could. And so using that language a lot, just changing that, you'll realize that there's huge, huge gains your kids make when they say, I can't brush my teeth. Oh, you can't do it yet, but you're going to be able to do it. I can't do this homework by myself. You'll be able to do it. I can't do this college essay. No, you just can't do it yet. Come on, let's figure out what's your strategy for figuring out how to do it. Because you know what? You're capable. And intelligence and attention, all those things, they're just blips on the radar. It comes down to grit and working hard, and let's just do it. And it might take 100 times for us to do it, and that's fine. And you're going to be frustrated, and that's fine. But you got this. And so that's a really important message as well. Right now, obviously, as you're thinking about this framework, you might say, my school's not doing that. And, my teachers aren't doing that. And I could see that my kid would love that so much, and it's not happening. And that's because it's not something that happens overnight. If you look at this graphic, it will show you there's a need for change. All of our kids' needs are not being met. Something has to change. And so districts start by exploring what are the options. What do we need to change? Now, UDL stands on 30 years of neuroscience research and hundreds of peer-reviewed studies. But teachers need time to explore it and to prepare to integrate it. And if it's not done at a system level, if school is not thinking about how do we provide professional development for all teachers, you're going to end up with I hope I get this teacher because she or he does this. That's not good enough. Every kid deserves a teacher who does this, but that will not happen overnight. And so if your schools aren't doing it, it's a cool opportunity to start bringing it forward and saying that, there is a way to systematically change what we're doing, okay? But we need to support this work as parents. We don't want one teacher to go to a conference and start doing it. We don't want one teacher to read a book, because then we're all just calling trying to get that teacher, okay? We need the schools to be universally designed. And so that's where you come in, of what you can do. And the first thing is to learn more about UDL. Okay, what resources are available? There's books that have been written about UDL. There's websites that talk about the guidelines. There's some videos. Okay, and when you start to find these things, you can start sharing them. If you find the UDL guidelines or you find a great book about UDL, you can start saying, hey, end of the year, teacher, look at this is a really cool book on UDL. Take this summer, this would be so cool for principals. And then think about, how UDL can help you at home, of starting to say, okay, let's think about some options for doing this. And let's, say to kids ahead of time, you know what, this is going to be hard. You tell me how you would do it. Because we don't want to be parent directed. We want to be student centered. We know what the goal is, and the goal needs to be the goal, and that's not transferable, that's not negotiable, but the way you get there can be. And so if we think about traditional parenting or reactive parenting, which I know I'm super guilty of, it's very different from proactive planning, of being like, hey, I want this room clean. I know that you're going to complain. Let's think about how can we clean this room so it's not going to be torture for all of us. Yes, I want everything in bins together, but you know what? Do you have other ideas? And my kids can say, we can make it look really clean in like 2 minutes if you just let us throw everything in the closet. You know what? Sounds good. We're having company over. Let's do it. Okay, because my goal is the room looks clean. Okay, and so it's really thinking about the flexibility of goals and how teachers kind of need to change their framework as well. And then ask schools, have you heard about UDL? Do you want me to explore some research for you? I mean, you can email me. I can give you a list of things. I know Understood is going to start doing some amazing work of putting some resources up. On the next slide, you'll see a link for CAST, the Center for Applied Science and Technology. They can support schools. So go to the CAST.org, go to udlcenter.org, and start sharing those things with schools and saying, you know what, I can support you. Like, I can start looking for small grants. Maybe the PTO can chip in and can start supporting teachers to do this work. But it comes down to the fact that, as a parent, as a teacher, as an administrator, as a consultant, I've worked with thousands of teachers, internationally and in schools internationally, that this I have never, ever seen not have positive outcomes. And again, they don't happen overnight, and it's not magic. But what it does is it creates learners. It doesn't just create A students, because in the scheme of things, when I'm hiring people, I'm not looking at GPA. Okay, it's, can they communicate well? Can they self-direct? Are they gritty? Do they love learning? Do they yearn to know more? And are they in an environment that's so motivating that they know that if they fail, who cares? I'm just not there yet. I'm going to come back for more. So that ends my portion of the presentation. And there's a couple of minutes left. We have 10 minutes. If anyone has any specific questions that you'd like me to answer to get a better idea of how the framework kind of fits in, to your district or school.
That was awesome, Katie. Thanks so much. We did have some questions come in. So first of all, I want to read some comments. People really love the dinner party analogy. Katie Gallagher, she said she loved it. Sarpax, her kids are laughing. She loves it. Jamie said he likes to think of, well, I know Jamie, but I think that's Jamie Martin. He likes to think of assistive tech as the marinara that unites the pasta and the meatballs. So,
I love it.
So however you want to use that, I think would be great. There are some really, kind of targeted questions that I wanted to get at because people were definitely interested in this topic. One of the questions is from Sarpax, one of our parents. She loves this concept. Remember, she's very specific, or he or she's very specific. She's a 2E child, ADHD, some executive functioning issues, has a hard time starting projects and making decisions. And she's very concerned about, she loves the concept, but she's concerned about narrowing down choices because a lot of the presentation was about sort of giving more choices. Does this approach work for a child who needs maybe a little bit more narrowing down, or does it need to be tailored for them? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it absolutely works. So for an example is one thing that I did when I taught 7th grade is I always had 7 choices so kids could roll the dice if they didn't know what they wanted to do. So there were 6 choices, and the 7th choice was roll the dice. And I wanted them to know that that's okay sometimes to make a decision like that. And so if you get to a point where it's 2 minutes and you can't narrow it down, roll the dice. And there's a couple things that happen. You're disappointed at what it rolls on, and then well, that's not the one I want to do. Or you say, I'm just so happy to have the decision made for me. If it's a student who, basically has a really tough time, and I see that as a teacher the first couple times, I might say, okay, you seem like you're having a lot of trouble. If you want me to narrow it down for 2 for you as a part of your strategy, then I'm happy to do that. But the difference is that child is the one who's really thinking about the fact, you know what, I can't have this many options. And I'm sorry, did we hear how old that the child was?
We didn't. So Sarpax, if you are out there and you want to just type that in, let us know. But I'm assuming that this child is in grade school based on how Sarpax phrased the question.
Right. So one thing that would be really good is I wouldn't give 7 choices if they were little. I might do something like maybe there's 4 choices and you have to pick a stick out of a hat or something like that. Or, maybe if the thing is I really want to start working on choice making, is what I might say is, tell me which one you absolutely don't want to do so we can start making choices, and then I'll help you pick one. And because again, there's so much mastery oriented feedback that goes on with that. And so what I would basically say is like, okay, so here are your options. Everyone now take a moment to think about which option you want. And then I would walk around, and anyone who couldn't select something, I would be like, okay, if you don't have an option in the next 5 minutes, why don't you come and sit with me, and then I'm going to give you some strategies or some coping skills of things that I do when I can't come up with an idea. Now, something I actually do as an adult, I am so guilty of this. This is so bad. But my sister and I, when we go out to restaurants, we can't come up with what we want to eat. So there's an app that you put in all your choices and spin a wheel, and it picks for you. And I literally are like, okay, I'm ordering that. So like giving options like that, if you're motivating and you say there's no right answer, sweetie, like there's whatever answer you pick, you can do something amazing with. Don't stress out on this. And again, the first time it might not work, but if you stick with that 100 times, that kid's going to get it.
Okay. Actually, Sarpex did write it, and I think it's useful. With Sarpex mentioned that the child was 17, so in the high school range, does the thoughts change for an older kid in terms of helping them manage those choices within sort of this approach?
I would probably suggest like these types of apps that literally exist that millions of people use, of like, you're automatically going to know there's a couple that you don't want to do. Like, I'm not going to get up and sing in front of the class. Okay, so now you're narrowing it down, and that's awesome. And you have to provide motivation about that. Like, I love how you knew you didn't want to do that one. So now we're down to 3. Okay, if you don't know what the 3 is and a minute goes by, you've got to just put it in the app and spin and just do it. Because there becomes a time where, again, the struggle is unproductive, and it's all about teaching students how to be productive and realize when struggle is actually not helping you go anywhere. You got to do something differently.
So another question we have is from Jamie. You'd mentioned technology a little bit. Is there a way that can you speak to how technology might help in this UDL framework with parents? And you said it a little bit, but are there any other tips you could give to parents about thinking about how technology can help them with their kids or with schools in general?
Well, UDL doesn't require technology. You could definitely have no tech UDL. The real benefit of technology is it does allow for so many more options at the tip of your fingers. So a district who's going BYOD, like when you have high school, you could say to students, I was in an AP Spanish class the other day, and basically the kids had to pick a country out of a hat in one of the Latin American countries, and then find any news article from that country, like on their phones, and then read it and then respond to these questions. And so it allowed for them, some of them were reading on the sports page, some of them were reading about food and culture, and it was basically just practicing reading, in Spanish. And so like something like that, you couldn't do without the iPhones, because you'd have to say, you can read this article here, or you can read this article here. And then also, as far as assistive technology, the real key thing is that the options are for everyone. So I'm very against this idea of saying like, okay, so you can use Dragon Naturally Speaking. It should be Dragon Naturally Speaking is a way that many people, including like police chiefs and lawyers, are able to transcribe quickly. Here it is. This is what it's about. Use it if it's helpful. And so it's all about basically making the options open to everyone. And when you're bringing in an assistive technology piece, allowing every student to access it, because it's good for all kids. It's not just good for some kids.
So I had just one follow-up question for myself on that. For UDL, we talked about kids with learning and attention issues. Is it right to say that UDL would apply to kids with learning attention issues, kids who may be receiving special education, and then other kids? It applies to everybody. Is that correct?
Absolutely, because students who are very compliant, meaning there's going to be some kids who sit there and do anything you ask them to do. They're not as engaged, and they're not getting those opportunities to really like build those self-direction skills and those communication skills and be creative and be problem solvers. So it benefits all students, and it empowers all students to find something that's relevant. And all of us want something that's relevant. In my book, UDL Now, I make the example of like when you go to a wedding, you know how when you don't get the meal choice card, you're kind of like, what are they going to eat? Like, we want options, and you want to be able to choose, and every student is like that. You want to be able to choose something that works best for you. And if you were to show up to a wedding and everyone were to have chicken, you'd been like, I didn't even ask. And so now you see the buffets, you see the stations, you have the choices, because we want that. Cell phone covers, there's like literally 3,000 of them. Why? Because people want options. And it's the same in school. And so we need to move away from this static curriculum and start giving our kids the options that they get everywhere else in life.
Awesome. Just one last question. Now, we talked a little bit about schools and the systematic change. Now, if I'm a parent out there and I want to know if my school is using UDL, is it aware of UDL, what's the best way for me to figure out if UDL is in operation in my school district and just get more information about within my school district? Who should I ask or what should I do?
Oh, I mean, for it to work systematically, it's probably going to be happening from the district level or the school level, and so it would be basically if there's an assistant superintendent or director of curriculum, likely that person would be thinking about whether it was going to affect professional development at the district level. Also, like as far as a principal of, all schools have professional development plans for their teachers of, throughout the year when there's half days and, when teachers have to stay after for meetings, there's generally a theme to that, because professional development, if it's 2 hours here, 1 hour here, 1 hour here, no one's really gaining much. Research tells us that you need approximately 49 hours in any one area to really develop professionally and start to increasing outcomes for students. And so, districts have usually something that they're focusing on, and you can just ask of, I learned a lot about UDL. Like, I'm just really excited to know how the PTO can help to support your professional development model. And if it's not UDL next year, that's okay. You can still explore it next year. It's not something that you want to just say, okay, like let's change what your focus is, because there's a lot of other things, that districts might be looking at professional learning communities or might be looking to align their curriculum to new standards, and those are all critical as well. But seeing if there's any long-term plan to think about how do we make these standards that are really important accessible for all students, and the Every Student Succeed Act now, which is at the federal mandate level, has identified very clearly that that's going to be universal design for learning.
Okay, that's awesome. That's a great way to end. So if you ask that question, definitely ask, take some of that advice and see if there's some way you can plug in parents and with UDL in your school district. So that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Katie. Thank you so much for presenting this webinar. It's been really helpful for our parents.
My pleasure. I love to talk about it. I love to do it. I get to work on it at the district level and work with our teachers, and I'm seeing amazing outcomes. Our students are so lucky to have them.
Okay, cool. And parents, if any of your other questions are out there, Kate, on the webinar presentation, Katie's website's there, so you can email her directly, and you can also join our community to ask a little bit more and learn a little bit more about UDL. As for future events, go to u.org/calendar to look at both past archived events and future ones, and to see what else is going on for Experts Live Daily. Thanks for joining us, and have a great day.